started this series with the idea of inviting esteemed disciples of Srila Prabhupada who had spent significant time preaching and spending time personally with Srila Prabhupada. And today we've invited them throughout this month to come and spend some time with us. Today it's my great honor to have with us and to invite and welcome His Holiness Prabhupada Swami. Maharaj, my humble obeisances to you, all glory to Srila Prabhupada. On behalf of the Gita Reading Society, we welcome you to Singapore. Maharaj is no stranger to all of us who are on live, and recently we were graced and we're very happy to have Maharaj giving us an initiation lecture not too long ago, if you recall. Maharaj is a disciple of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, and he has spent a significant part of his lifetime preaching, spreading the glories of the holy name, and following the instructions of his spiritual master. Today we invite Maharaj to speak on Srila Prabhupada, his legacy, and to perhaps share with us some pastimes and some connections and some important lessons perhaps that we, who are mostly comprised of the second generation devotees, can take with us in remembering Srila Prabhupada on this very important occasion. Maharaj, I pass over the floor to you. Hare Krishna.
Sorry, Maharaj, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Maharaj, we can hear you.
Okay. The button was in an off position. Now it's in an on position. So the part you couldn't hear, I was offering pranams to Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya and the Hare Krishna mantra. That's what was not being broadcast. So now I'll continue. This glorifying Srila Prabhupada is joyful, and there's no limit. So let me begin, and we'll see how far we get. Just yesterday evening, our time, there was a discussion on the topic of gratitude. And gratitude is a quality that propelled Srila Prabhupada, as we know. He received such mercy, and he felt that mercy from his spiritual master and the disciplic succession and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Here's a nice quote from 10th Canto Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 48. This is an image of a murti of Akrura. Akrura, as you know, was Krishna's uncle, and he was a perfected devotee. He had the service of bringing Krishna from Vrindavan to Mathura, and Krishna understood what his mission was. It was to kill Kamsa. Kamsa's mission was to kill Krishna. Krishna's mission was to kill Kamsa, and he made a promise, which he kept, which was, after Kamsa is killed, I'll come visit you at your home, because Akrura lived in Mathura, at least at that time. Later, when Krishna went to Dwaraka, he also went to Dwaraka. When Krishna killed Kamsa, there were a few events, about 3 months worth of events before he returned. He released Vasudeva and Devaki from prison. He oversaw, mind you, he's just 11 years old at this time, but he oversaw the installation of Ugrasena again as the king in Mathura. He received his Upanayana Krishna from Garga Muni. He went to school with Sandipani Muni, and he returned. He visited 2 premises. He visited Kubja and he visited Akrura. And this is spoken by Akrura when Krishna visits him again. Now, he understood clearly. In Vrindavan, they didn't, because of their particular kind of love, but Akrura understood Krishna's divinity. What learned person would approach anyone but you for shelter, when you are the affectionate, grateful, and truthful well-wisher of your devotees? Now, truthful, he kept his word. And grateful is kritagya, mentioned in the Sanskrit. And Prabhupada's explanation is, the Lord is kritagya, grateful whatever little worship a devotee offers, and even if the devotee forgets, the Lord does not. So Krishna is grateful, and the followers of Krishna are very grateful for Krishna's mercy. Here's a little audio recording of Srila Prabhupada appreciating the with gratitude. This is one of the outstanding qualities of our founder Acharya, his sense of gratitude to Bhakti Siddhanta. So it's a little short audio recording on the occasion of Bhakti Siddhanta's appearance day. Our sound system is not working properly. Oh, what's going on here? Oh. Hold on, folks. I'm going to go to another place and see if I can get this on the screen. It's very nice. Hold on. Gosh. It's not playing.
Is there a play button? Okay, can I do so?
In this way,
Okay. I had the speaker on mute, but Jabra speaker.
really, I became attached to this Gaudiya Mount activity.
Click on that.
Click on what? Okay. Apology for. Here comes the recording of Prabhupada, which you can't see the image, but here's the recording.
This way, gradually, I became attached to these Gaudiya Mount activities, and by the grace of Krishna, my business also was not going very well. Krishna says, Jasahon anigrindami hriseta dhanam sami. If somebody wants to be actually devotee of Krishna, at the same time keeps his material attachment, then Krishna's business is he takes away everything material so that same person he becomes, dependent on Krishna. So that actually happened to my life. I was obliged to come to this movement to take up this very seriously. And I was dreaming that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is calling me. Please come out with me. So I was sometimes horrified. Oh, what is this? I have to give up my family life. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is calling me. I have to take sannyas. Oh, I was horrified. But I saw several times calling. So anyway, it is by his grace I was forced to give up my family life and so-called business life. And he brought me somewhere or other in preaching his gospel. So, this is a memorable day. What he deserved. I am trying little bit and you are all helping me. So I have to thank you more. You are actually representative of my Guru Maharaj. Because you are helping me in executing the order of my Guru Maharaj. Thank you very much.
Sorry for the technology glitch, but we'll get back to where we were. So there's the image that you were supposed to be seeing. Whoops. Prabhupada feeling very grateful for something that initially appeared to be horrifying to him, but very clearly he was selected, identified by Bhaktisiddhanta specifically to perform this service several times, directly appearing to him in his dream. And So he was propelled by that order, and he wasn't left alone. He was sent, the assistants were sent to him. At least that's how Prabhupada saw. His close followers were representatives of Bhaktisiddhanta to assist him. And he was feeling immense gratitude. So this is one of the dimensions of our founder Acharya, and it's why we're here, that he had such feelings. Now, he didn't always exhibit those feelings, but one can understand those feelings were always there. His sense of being connected to Bhaktisiddhanta and being supported by Bhaktisiddhanta in the execution of Bhaktisiddhanta's order. So he was in safe hands, and extremely powerful, propelled. Another propellant, in addition to gratitude, was his quality of compassion. Listen carefully to his recorded lectures, or find in the transcriptions of these lectures this phrase, Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu, which very simply means everyone should be happy. Listen with that ear, listen to his recordings, and it's in every single lecture, without exception. He didn't specifically say that he wanted everyone to be happy, but that was his mood. He wanted everyone to be happy. And to have everyone become happy, sometimes he had to speak very strongly. Many times he would speak very strongly, but the purpose of that speaking strongly was to assist people to become happy, because the nature of this world, it's not a happy place. It's a place of misery, according to what Krishna says, and sure enough, by experience. Dukkhalayam ashashvatam, and temporary. No permanent happiness. So he dedicated his life, at least the portion of his life, preparing to come to America to go to the West, to English-speaking parts of the world, to fulfill this order of Bhaktisiddhanta. And he toiled day and night very intensely. This particular photograph is meaningful to me. I'll just share a little bit. I don't know what city this was in, but I do know what my experience was with Prabhupada in New York. And skipping some details because of time, as the temple commander, one of the duties of a temple commander in that particular time, there were 150 devotees in the temple, because the ISKCON Press, now BBT, was also in the temple, members. And it was, the temple commander doesn't have a job description other than whatever needs to get done, you see that it gets done. Temple commander. And when Prabhupada came, there was a lot to get done, and one of the things that was needed was to guard his quarters, because we didn't want any difficulty to come to Prabhupada. So there was a requirement to have his quarters guarded 24 hours a day. And it was easy to get people to guard his room during the day, because they could just stand at the doorway. And then at night, it was really easy, because the door into Prabhupada's quarters opened into his quarters. So someone just rolled out their sleeping bag, put their head against the door, and no one could get in without banging them in the head. But the other difficulty was, there was another entrance into his quarters, which was, there was a little bit of a backyard, very small, because it was a city residence. But there was a boundary wall, like 10-foot tall boundary wall with broken glass across the top. But still, thieves in New York know how to climb over those walls. So we had somebody guarding the back door or back windows. And everyone was happy to do that during the day, but it wasn't difficult. It wasn't easy to get somebody to do that at night. So when the temple commander can't find somebody to get something done, they do it themselves. That's the other unspoken part of the job description. So I was happy. I was, up all night at the back window and watched what Prabhupada's activities were in the nighttime. And at nighttime, at a certain regulated time, he'd go to the front room, which was the same size as the temple room, because it was a double brownstone building. And he'd sit with the harmonium, just himself, and sing Narottam Das Thakur or Bhaktivinoda Thakur bhajans for 15, 20 minutes. And then he'd stop. Then he'd go into from that front room towards the back, turn out the light, and go take rest for about an hour and a half. And then the light would go on after an hour and a half, and wash his face and whatever else he did. Then he came out to this sitting room, lighting looking like this, and had spread out on his desk the commentaries of the acharyas, which were these really big books, big sized pages, with printed versions of the Sanskrit of commentaries and multiple commentaries. And he would run his fingers across the page and have a dictaphone in his other hand and dictate the Bhaktivedanta purports. What a sacrifice. And those of you that like reading Prabhupada's books, there's volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes, and then more volumes and more volumes. And Bhagavatam was the principal exercise, but how much he cherished leaving a legacy of transcendental knowledge. There's a nice story, and I've been trying to verify someone, was there for him telling the story because I heard it somewhere. But anyway, one of those times when somebody was bringing Prabhupada a book that had just been published. This is a Bhagavad Gita published by Macmillan, which Prabhupada look at his smile, and his servant is equally happy seeing Prabhupada smile like that. But he was leafing through the pages and looking at the printed paintings, and looked up, looked around the room, and said, "One day there may be no temples. One day there may be no devotees, but there will always be my books." So he was leaving behind him, as the Bhagavatam describes in the prayers of the demigods to Krishna, he left a boat where future generations can cross the ocean of material existence. He understood that's what these books were for. It was for the current population, but it was for the whole world to cross the ocean of material existence, this Sarve Sukhino Bhavantu. Therefore, he sacrificed so much to provide us with these literatures and encouraged us to distribute these literatures. And don't forget, he encouraged us to read these literatures and study them very carefully so that our material existence could end and our spiritual existence could be revived. That was his interest. Now, in connection with, this is a little Prabhupada story. This is in New York. You may recognize the person on the right. The artist is Pushkar. Over there on the left is Jayadvaita Swami, much younger version. And behind Pushkar is Mother Janava, another artist. So there was this procedure where devotees would, when visiting New York, he spent one day interacting with the ISKCON Press people. Then it was ISKCON Press, later BBT. And one division of ISKCON Press was the artists, so they would bring all of their paintings, like you see against the radiator over there on the wall, behind, on the back side of the painting, photograph. And they would show Prabhupada different paintings. I couldn't find this particular painting, but I remember Prabhupada looking at the painting of Yudhishthir from Canto 1. The painting shows Yudhisthira after hearing from Arjuna that Krishna had departed. He first and then the other brothers followed him, heading for the Himalayas to leave their body and leave this world after turning the kingdom over to Parikshit Maharaj. So it shows, that original painting shows Yudhisthira carrying a danda. And Prabhupada just remarked that the sannyasis don't receive danda when they take sannyas. The brahmanas receive danda. The sannyasis, the kshatriyas don't receive danda, but they renounce the world and go to the forest like that. And like that, each painting, Prabhupada would make some comment. Now, during this particular exchange, I was seated basically where Pushkar is standing, a little bit to this. There was a big desk. And as Prabhupada was looking at the paintings and joyfully, lovingly engaging with the artists, because this was their inspiration for the whole year to keep them going to the next year. It was very, very warm and loving. And I noticed that as Prabhupada was speaking, he reached on the corner of his desk was a little buzzer button, and he pressed it. And we couldn't hear because the buzzer had a wire, and it rang in his servants' quarters. And right in the middle of this joyful, laughing, happy, exuberant, effusive atmosphere in his quarters, the servant came in to report, paid obeisances to find out what Prabhupada wanted. Before he even finished paying obeisances, Prabhupada's mood changed 180. His voice thundered something, and I just kind of blanked out what he was saying because I was so shocked. And the servant heard in a submissive way and paid his obeisances and left. And as soon as he left, Prabhupada's mood completely changed around to the way that it was just before he came in. And so my impression, and it's still with me, it was like a Kshatriya who had a sword in a sheath. He pulled out the sword, waved the sword, put the sword back in the sheath, and it was over. He wasn't controlled by anger. He was angry, but not controlled by anger. He was using it, and I found out later why. His servant was having some spiritual problems, and Prabhupada knew, and Prabhupada wanted to wake him up. And so he exhibited anger because it was required. He exhibited anger because it was required. But it wasn't controlled. He just went right back into a joyful, joyful, joyful exchange. Hari Sori told me this story about Prabhupada interacting with Palika. Palika was a Mataji who was a cook. And Prabhupada was very, very particular about how he wanted things prepared. And so when he took his midday bath, he would sit and say Gayatri. As soon as he was done, the routine was hot prasadam would be brought. And amongst the hot prasadam was puris or chapatis that were literally puffed up like a balloon. And then Prabhupada would poke his finger in the top of the chapati or puri. The steam would come out, and then the puri would sag, but it would be very hot inside because there was hot air inside. And then he would use that like a spoon. The hot chapati or puri would then be used to take some sabji or something, and then he expected them to be puffed up. That was the standard. So one time, Hari Sori told me, Palika was late, bringing the next puri or chapati. And Prabhupada raised his voice and scolded her badly. You're going to lose your service. You got to be on time, or something. I don't know what he said. And she started to cry. And she left the room. And Prabhupada turned to Hari Sori and said, I can't speak to women like that except Palika. He was chastising her to make her chaste, to her service to Prabhupada. And he did it in that particular way because it was to help her and she could take it. He didn't use it. He didn't use that with everybody. He used it with persons who he knew they could take it, and he used it. Transcendental autocrat. Here's another incident with paintings. Here's on the left side, you see a painting of, it's a Parikshit painting of Krishna bringing Nanda Maharaj's shoes at the request of Mother Yashoda. It was the story takes place in 1975. It was Berkeley, and the painting of Parikshit's painting of this was shown, and then Prabhupada made his comment, and Prabhupada's comment was, "Just see, Krishna is serving his devotee just like a little child," and then he pointed out that he liked the fact that Parikshit hadn't spoiled the painting by making Krishna's hair too long. And then he commented that Jadharani likes to make Krishna's hair too long. He was teasing. Big hairs. Women are very fond of big hairs. And then the devotee took a copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita from the bookshelf and showed Prabhupada on the painting. It was a Jadharani painting of Lord Chaitanya with long hair. And Prabhupada's comment was, Lord Chaitanya has come to shave you. But he said, save you. And then devotees were looking at each other like, because there's a certain voice inflection in Bengali where S sounds like SH. And Prabhupada understood. He said, yes, Lord Chaitanya has come to save you and shave you. This is just a little anecdote of how Prabhupada would engage lovingly with devotees. Now, again, the glories of Prabhupada are unlimited. His mission of providing transcendental literature and his mission not only was empowered by Bhaktisiddhanta's words, but directly by Rupa Goswami. I'm sure many of you know the story, but it was told by an officer of the Jiva Institute, that place in Vrindavan that keeps manuscripts of the 6 Goswamis, particularly Jiva Goswami, Vrindavan Institute. And Prabhupada was visiting one of the directors and described to him what happened, that he saw. It wasn't a dream. He saw 2 very saintly persons. Rupa Goswami is the one who spoke to him, but the taller one was Sanatan Goswami. And Rupa Goswami gave his benediction. He said, I know you're in anxiety. Don't be in anxiety. Everything will be fine. Carry forward with this mission, and you'll be protected. So Prabhupada had he had transcendental experiences that he very, very rarely revealed. This was a very it wasn't known till much later when this person revealed this story. But Prabhupada had intimate association with even previous acharyas. That was his status. Yet at the same time, Srila Prabhupada was most humble and contemplating, as you heard in that little recording we struggled with at the beginning, he had lots of mercy. Feeling helpless, feeling mission impossible, but being greatly empowered. So the humility combined with superlative empowerment, what a combination. There's a story I like very much that's in that book about Jamuna's life. This is a photograph taken in London, several mornings actually, because there's several photos taken by Vishaka, where they were walking through a field, where it was tall grass. And as you know, in London, it sometimes rains, and in the morning there's dew. So Jamuna describes that she was following behind Srila Prabhupada, that the grass was several inches tall and wet. So she started thinking, it doesn't get better than this. I'm just following in the footsteps of my spiritual master. So she started meditating on seeing where he put his foot. And as she was looking to see exactly where he put his foot, she couldn't see any footprints. She looked behind herself and she saw her footprints. And again looked to where Prabhupada was walking, and there were no footprints where he had walked. So she boldly asked him, Prabhupada, why there aren't any footprints for you where there are for myself? He smiled and said, someday you'll understand. That was his answer. A similar thing happened in Australia. Another devotee gave a very similar story. No footprints. Like, mystical? There's no explanation of why. It's just something very mystical. And if any of you have had the opportunity, or if you haven't, then please take the opportunity to hear Shyamsundar, Prabhupada's disciple and then husband of Malati. He's a great storyteller. And I've heard him in person a few times, and he always starts with, Prabhupada was a magician. He always expected, whenever going into Prabhupada's room, something unexpected is going to happen. And sure enough, something unexpected happened. So one morning, I'll give you a little Prabhupada story here. We were walking from the rented building, these double brownstone buildings. This was 1971, 72, 73, like that. And from where the temple was located, there were different morning walks. One morning we walked to the Brooklyn Promenade. So to get there, you have to walk up a little street with overhanging trees and, nice neighborhood. Brooklyn Heights, it's called. And as we came, he would walk really fast. We're tall and he was not so tall, but he would walk faster. We'd have to, like, every third step, kind of like skip or run just to keep up with him. And every now and then he would stop. And one time he stopped and he pointed with his cane to some grass like this growing in the cracks of a sidewalk. And he looked around and said, what is this? And somebody said, Prabhupada, that's some grass that's growing in the sidewalk. And Prabhupada asked, how did it get here? And somebody volunteered, some spores traveled through the air and fell in the crack, and some water went into the crack, and the grass grew. And Prabhupada didn't say no or yes. He just said, this is a demigod fallen from the heavenly planets. And everyone's looking at each other like, what? And then he didn't say what the reference was, but the Chandogya Upanishad, where those who do yajna, they attain the heavenly planets, and by descending, and when their piety exhausted, they come down in the form of rain, and rain becomes grain, and grain is taken by the man, and the man receives that grain and then has a living entity and impregnates the next living entity for their child who does a yajna, and that cycle goes on. Chandogya Upanishad. He didn't say what the reference was. It was just like this mind-blowing, where this grass in the crack in the sidewalk come from. And he looked at everybody and moved his head, and off we went, continuing on the rest of the walk. We got to the rest of the walk. There's the Brooklyn Promenade is overhanging an expressway called the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. And just on the other side, you see the New York City skyline. There's the Hudson River coming down. Then there's the skyline with all the big skyscrapers. Prabhupada stopped, waited till everybody caught up, and then pointed with his cane and said, This is built on sex desire. Like all these big, tall towers, and described that's they're building something temporary, so they can live in the penthouse of an upper story, so they can have their sex life in the upper stories of a penthouse. This whole city life is built on sex desire. He looked around and kept walking, and he would sometimes just like lay bombs, and the devotees loved it. Another time we were walking it's just from New York, in another park in Brooklyn called Battery Park. And as we were walking, there was a pond, large pond. And Prabhupada left the walkway, went over through the grass to where the ducks were. And he asked, does anybody have any prasadam? So somebody had some, and they took it out of their bag and started throwing pieces of bread or whatever it was to the ducks. And Prabhupada smiled and looked at everybody and then nodded his head and started walking and then stopped before we got to the sidewalk and said, what lesson have we learned today? And everybody was looking at each other like, what does he mean? And Prabhupada very simply said, the duck that quacks the loudest gets the bread. And smiled. And he didn't elaborate. He just, be enthusiastic for devotion to Krishna, and Krishna's reciprocation will be there. And there's so many nice little anecdotal stories. I'm sure you'll hear many of them in the course of your classes. Prabhupada had different moods. He was very, very joyful, very, very funny, unexpectedly say witty things at different times. I remember one, it was in New York, and there was a reporter who was a young lady who was a kind of a challenging type of personality. So she asked Prabhupada, why do you shave your head? And he didn't flinch. He just said, we feel that warm legs and a cool head is better than cold legs and a hot head. Because she had a mini dress on. And she blushed. He just rolled on. Great spontaneous humor. Very reflective of his mission, carrying forward the mission of disciplic succession. And I'll end with this. May we always stay under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. One of the best ways to stay under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet is you read his books, because he gave himself fully along with the entire disciplic succession. I mean, historically, it was unprecedented. What he did in terms of the translation of volumes, unprecedented. The entire Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, his followers finished. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Essential Teachings of Rupa Goswami, Nectar of Devotion, and Upadeshamrita. Volumes and volumes and volumes, not only for the scholarly people of the world, but for all the people of the world, making this indelible impression to change the course of misdirected civilization, exactly as Vyas was being instructed by Narada. Prabhupada made it a reality, along with everything else that he did. So, to stay always under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet, read his books, of course, distribute his books, but in the course of distributing his books, you need to read his books so you can speak from realization what's in his books, how wonderful they are. And when you feel how wonderful they are, the message in your voice will carry to the person who you want to receive the books. And stay in the service of the Vaishnavas. stay always in this mood of service to the Vaishnavas, because we are less than perfect and Vaishnavas are less than perfect. And that's to be expected because we're not pure devotees yet. But stay in the association of those who want to hear, chant, and remember the wonderful pastimes of Krishna and his pure devotees like Srila Prabhupada. Stay in such association. So there's my little contribution to your exercise there in Singapore for remembering the legacy and the pastimes and the qualities of Srila Prabhupada.
Maharaj, thank you very much for giving us your time. I'm wondering if you have a few minutes, if there could be an opportunity for anyone to perhaps ask you a question.
I left time for that. Yes.
Parmanand Prabhu, you'll be able to see. Would you like to take over here?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. We have a question from one of the attendees. Maharaj, they would like to know how you came under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada. What was the starting point, turning point for you to come under His divine grace's shelter?
Because of time, I'll tell the short version. And the short version was in 1969, 1970, in that time frame, while I was in college, Prabhupada came to this college that I was attending and a kind of a tour with Allen Ginsberg of different universities from my university. Prabhupada went next to Ohio State, where Hayagriva was a professor. And so I didn't know anything. I didn't know who Prabhupada was. I didn't know what Hare Krishna movement was. But the short version is I was passing through the student union, saw a big crowd around a door of one of the assembly rooms. And I went inside, and there was Prabhupada chanting with Allen Ginsberg. And I stayed for some time. I didn't know what it was. I had never experienced chanting before. And when the chanting was over, he talked very briefly, less than 10 minutes, and then it was prasadam. And then I left to go because I was on my way to go see a friend. So that was my introduction, and my life changed from that point. You know, things happened, and people came into my life that I didn't know, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing happened. So included in that was people who were regularly chanting, so they introduced me to chanting. I was doing like 16 other, searching spiritual practice kind of things, and I found chanting was most effective, and so forth. So that's how it got started. So that one person, Borijan Prabhu, was at the same university. He gave me a Back to Godhead magazine. Some of you know Borijan Prabhu. So then I read the Back to Godhead magazine, and that turned me upside down because at the end, so there's details. That Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was the feature writer in that particular Back to Godhead magazine. And when I read his article, it took me 3 hours because of his English was, another English that I was used to. And my consciousness was elevated to a place that I never had experienced before. So I was really moved. And then other things happened, and gradually a life of devotion unfolded.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, there's one more question on how to stay connected with Srila Prabhupada, especially for those of us who are the next generation of devotees and not his direct disciples.
Same. I mentioned it in the course of the talk. Read Prabhupada's books. Of course, there are his recorded lectures. Let me ask all of you, the second generation people. When, just like there may be some of you there who are disciples of Tamal Krishna Maharaj or Bhakti Chu Maharaj or those whose spiritual masters have departed. Now, that's very traumatic when that happens. But for me, Prabhupada left the world in 1977. Do the math. Here we are, 2021. That's a lot of years. So how do you stay connected through all those years? How do I stay connected? Same, how I stay connected is how you can feel connected. Hear his recorded lectures every day, at least 2 hours. While I'm doing other things, taking prasadam and other things. I'm hearing Prabhupada every day, at least 2 hours, and reading his books regularly, and discussing and diving deeply into his message, and you feel that connection. I feel that connection. So just like that last image you saw on the screen, may we always stay under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. So serving those who are connected to Prabhupada, reading his books and hearing his lectures, and of course, distributing his books and serving his mission. You'll feel, if you serve his mission, you'll feel connected.
Thank you, Maharaj. I think that's all for now that we have.
Okay.
Can I take the opportunity to thank you for your time? I know you're in Atlanta, I believe, Maharaj.
I'm Atlanta.
And we're all grateful you've just put us in the slot and given us so much of this nectar. One thing that I would take back, Maharaj, is this point about how important it is to read Srila Prabhupada's books, so that, among other things, if you actually speak to someone after you've read it, then, as you said, the message of what you've read is actually in your voice. I've never heard anyone express it that way, and I think that's something that I would really want to contemplate on, because that would be a wonderful way to spread Krishna consciousness. Sometimes the tendency is we take books and go out for distribution, but how often do we read and relish Srila Prabhupada's books? That is something I think that we should spend more time, equal number of time, as much as we do distribution, if not more. Thank you for that, Maharaj. And thank you for giving us some mystical association with Srila Prabhupada too. It always perks us up to hear that. And thank you for giving us the most important message, the prayer that you have given us today. May we always stay under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. And may we always be able to serve you too, Maharaj, in Singapore. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Look forward to being with you all again.
Yes.
Srila Prabhupada.
Have a good day, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. And thank you all for joining us today. And we hope that we'll all be able to meet next week, same time, for another wonderful guest speaker. In the meantime, we have many programs going on for the whole week. And wherever you are connected to your own Namhat programs, reading programs, reading.
This is from Anil Prabhu. Why Krishna's plan was to start the preaching activity to Srila Prabhupada so late in his life?
Well, you have to ask Krishna. But there are some external likely reasons. One was after World War II, there were no visas to go to other countries. People were locked down. They're not trusting people from other countries to come to their country because the war had withdrawn everybody into a seclusion space, protective space. The very year that Prabhupada came was the very year that they opened up visas. No, the worldly events permitted him to come when he came. And before that, he tried in India. And Bhaktisiddhanta tried in England through two sannyasis. Very elevated personalities. So another was, the internal preparation that Krishna was, arranging in Prabhupada's life. Like similar, different, but similar, the plan to send people, sannyasis from Gaudiya Math to go to England, I learned this from Rabindra Srila Prabhu. It got delayed because Bhaktisiddhanta wanted a book to introduce to the English-speaking people in England, where his disciples were going, who is Lord Chaitanya. So Professor Sanyal was like a super scholar, and it was taking a little longer than expected. So the departure was delayed because he wanted a book. Sri Krishna Chaitanya was the book. It's very thick, very detailed, very scholarly for the people of England to know who is Lord Chaitanya, Sri Krishna Chaitanya. And Prabhupada also, the little delay was he was preparing the first 3 volumes or first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And when that was done, it was time to go. So then he had something to give other than his association and his lectures. He had books. So that was another. If there's some other internal reason, you have to ask Krishna. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.